On a cool Friday morning, this farmer and his friends were working in a field when they suddenly spotted something strange. But they never could have guessed that they were about to make a groundbreaking discovery. Mornings are usually refreshing, and you wake up feeling energized, so it's the perfect time to do arduous activities before the sun comes up. So, on one cool Friday morning in 2015, James Bristle decided to dig up one of his soy fields. He had been planning it for a while, and he enlisted the help of two of his friends. So, at about 7:30 in the morning, James's friends arrived at his house, and together they went to the soy field. The men cracked jokes as they walked to the field. They also looked forward to chugging down a few bottles of beer after all the hard work. But little did they know that they would soon be busy with something else. Not even in their wildest dreams could they have known that they would soon stumble upon a rare discovery that would end up at the University of Michigan. What could it be? Well, keep watching to find out. But I can tell you one thing for sure, it's not what you are thinking. Wasting no time, the men got down to work and they started digging. But about 20 minutes after they began tilling the ground, James's shovel struck something hard, and he quickly called his friends' attention to it. "Hey, guys! There is something here. Come and take a look at this." James screamed and his friends walked over to him. The trio then began digging the ground around the area where James spotted the strange object. They couldn't see the object properly yet because it was covered in mud. But one thing they knew was that whatever it was something really big. As the men started removing the mud from the object, they thought it was a bent fence post. But in a few minutes, they would be in for a big shock. Moments later, the men finally unearthed a huge bone from the ground, but they weren't sure what it was yet because it was covered in mud. After removing the mud from the object, they discovered that it was a rib bone, a gigantic one. James couldn't believe such a thing had been buried in his soy field the whole time. Well, the shock soon wore off, and the men became curious to know the nature of the bone. One of James's friends even joked that the bone could belong to a dinosaur. So he carried the bone in his arms, ran around the field, and just kept screaming, "Here comes the dinosaur! We found the dinosaur!" Well, it wasn't a dinosaur, but if not that, what was it? Soon enough, James's kid heard the men's screams, and they rushed down to the field to take a look at the great find. When my 5-year-old grandson came over and saw the pelvis, he just stood there with his jaw wide open and stared. He was in awe. Although the men weren't sure of the nature of the bone, they knew it was phenomenal. The men also assumed the rib they had dug out was the only one underneath the ground. Little did they know that there were still more bones down there. Not one, not two, not three. Knowing they couldn't figure out the true nature of the bone by themselves, James and his friends reached out to paleontologists of the University of Michigan to tell them about their discovery. Soon enough, they would realize the enormity of this discovery. Wasting no time, a team from the paleontology department was sent down to James's field. Dan Fisher, a professor of paleontology and director of the university's Museum of Paleontology, was also part of the team. When the team got there, they took a good look at the rib and they immediately figured out what it was. The paleontologists were in disbelief and they just kept staring at the bones without saying a word. James and his friends began to run out of patience as the speechless men didn't seem to be in a hurry to disclose the nature of the discovery. A lot was probably going through their mind. They must have been wondering how the bone got to the field, James said. After what took like forever, Dan Fisher finally broke his silence. He told James and his friend that he would tell them the nature of the bone, but he had a strong feeling that there were still more bones underground, so he asked James if they could carry out an excavation and access the bones. That way, he would be sure if the bone was really what he and his colleagues thought it was. "I told Dan he could carry out an excavation, but I was also worried that he would be wrong," James said. Dan and his team began their work right away, and they were given just one day to dig up the lucky find. 15 staff members from the University of Michigan descended on the muddy field to help pull the remains out of the ground. They also got help from a local excavator called James Bollinger. The fact that they didn't know what they would find down there made the whole experience interesting and exciting. As the men worked, they had different theories as to what would be done with the bones if there were any down there. Firstly, how did these bones even end up in James's farm in the first place? As the men discussed, one of the diggers suddenly screamed, and everyone rushed down to where he was standing. Then he pointed at something on the ground. It was a giant tusk. Now, everyone was sure that they would find more remains in the ground. Dan Fisher was right. When the men found the giant tusk, they became very motivated. They began to work at a very fast pace, James said. At that moment, Dan, who was now very sure that they were close to making a groundbreaking discovery, finally told James that the bones could belong to a mammoth, who was now very sure that they were close to making a groundbreaking discovery, and he added that he hoped James would donate his woolly mammoth find to the University of Michigan for further study. Dan also speculated that the mammoth probably lived some 10 to 15,000 years ago. He also added that the mammoth may have been killed by hunters. Besides, a mark on the rib showed that the mammoth may have been butchered. Well, what was it doing beneath the ground then? If they had butchered it, why didn't they just feast on it right away, or even sell it off? James and his friends asked. Just then, Dan explained that the hunters probably placed the mammoth in a pond as a sort of primitive meat preservation technique. Meanwhile, the men continued digging the ground, hoping to find more remains. After hours of working on the soy field, the team eventually unearthed something shocking. Apart from the mammoth's pelvic bone, they unearthed a skull, complete with 2 giant tusks, ribs, vertebrae, and both shoulder blades. Wow, how incredible! Dan described the astonishing discovery as one of the top 10 most significant finds in Michigan history. While the remains found on James's land weren't complete, the woolly mammoth skeleton was only missing its hind limbs, feet, and some minor bones. Additionally, the fact that paleontologists were able to extract the skeleton whole may allow them to learn much more from the skeleton than they have from others. Although the discovery of the tusked skeleton easily conjures up images of a woolly mammoth, Dan stated that the animal may not have been woolly at all. The mammoth skeleton may actually belong to a Jeffersonian mammoth. Jeffersonian mammoths are thought to have been hybrids of woolly and Columbian mammoths because they share characteristics of both species. Regardless of this, one thing is certain: this discovery is rare and incredible. Soon enough, news about the mammoth find spread around the neighborhood, and many people visited James's soy field to see it for themselves. In an interview, James said, "We've had people drive out from Battle Creek and Jackson. They drive into Chelsea and stop somewhere to ask where the farm is and then just come on out," he said. "We've had teachers and kids with their parents and grandparents. Just earlier today, we had a man who was in hospice care come out to see the bones. The reaction has just been amazing." So what eventually happened to the mammoth skeleton? Well, James donated it to the University of Michigan. What do you think about this discovery? What would you do if you were in James's shoes? Would you let go of something precious that you found on your property? Share your thoughts in the comments section. Also, if you found this video educational, then give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. If you haven't done so, subscribe to the channel to get more incredible stories. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.